guest, for being a part of our first virtual Zoom conference. And we are planning to continue this at least while we're in this COVID threat. So keep prayers up, and hopefully the Lord will remove this from us and we can get back to normal. Amen. If y'all don't mind, I would like Pastor Robinson to give us a quick prayer and we'll get started.
Sure. Let us pray. Gracious God, our Heavenly Father, we do love to call you our Father. We are delighted today to have this opportunity to share with each other and to share with you more importantly. But we thank you, Father, for this vehicle that you've made available unto us to express our concerns and to even make our request known unto you with thanksgiving in our hearts. We thank you for all the participants. Thank you for the organization and for those who are responsible for this particular event taking place. And we ask your blessings upon each of us and grant us the wisdom and the compassion that we need in order that we might be useful in your kingdom and might be a blessing unto you, even as we are a blessing unto others. We ask it all in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. All right, thank y'all again. We're planning on an hour and a half, so we're gonna jump right into it. The Lord gave this to me that we can't meet physically, but we have to meet some kind of way. There's a lot going on in the world, in our city, and communication is the key. We have to know what's going on, how do we get to this point, and where do we go from here? And we can only advance as a community working on it together. Can't no one person do this by themselves, but as a collective group, I'm confident, I'm very confident that we can do it, because, you know, first in my life is Jesus Christ, and there is no failure in Jesus Christ. So if we can come together as a group and discuss some of these issues, and I guarantee you, we're going to be a better person. We'll have a better community. And what we have done, I have asked the panelists to give a 5-minute talk on how they feel we are at this point and where do we go from here. Two things I asked them to talk about is what's going on around the world with police killings and the riots and so forth and so on, and also speak on this COVID epidemic that is really destroying a lot of people's lives and family members. So we're gonna jump right into it. And then we did receive some questions. Well, they'll answer the questions to the best of our abilities after we get through this part of the session, okay? Zoe Grant has control over everything, so she will be in control. I'm just here to support and try to expedite what's happening right now. Amen. All right. So I would like for Brian Ward to kick us off. And Brian's in Tennessee right now, so we pray for his safe travels to get back home. Brian.
Thank you so much. As it relates to, I think, the COVID-19 situation, I think that we are in definitely a turning point in history, at least within my lifetime, that we've never been in a situation like this before, ever. It's a very scary situation to where, you know, you don't know how to treat something or don't know the answer for something. Even the most dangerous thing, whether it's, you know, cancer, whatever it may be, There's treatments for that we hope that it will work, given this COVID, 19 situation. I think, my viewpoint is, I think the scary point about it is just, we don't know what to even hope for or what to even look for as far as the resolution goes. I've only kind of depended on one thing, and that's my faith in God to get me through this time. Me having a career in real estate and meeting several individuals, all walks of life, trying to protect myself, and having a son and trying to protect him, and just going about your daily activities of a community, church musician, going to church every Sunday, those type of things. It's a very, definitely a scary thing. You don't want to get anyone else sick. You don't want to, be the cause of, someone else, and you're not doing it intentionally, but, this is something of the unknown or ghost that we don't know how to control. I think that we're in a time and an hour that if you don't have God, I strongly encourage everybody to come closer to Christ, because literally that's the only thing, again, in my viewpoint, that I can lean on. Moving to the situation of the times that we're in, as far as police brutality, racism, and things of that nature there. It's a very, again, in my lifetime, I've never seen it be this vigilant and kind of out there as far as public eye, to where you have hundreds of thousands of individuals while going through a pandemic, sacrificing their possible life to accomplish the debate upon racism. Me being a young individual, the thought that I think is the most craziest is racism within itself is a debate. It shouldn't be, and me being a young African American as well, the stance that I take, it just kind of unheard of that we have advanced so far in everything in life, technology and sports and medicine and all these other things. But we still are kind of crippled by this conversation. I grew up, one of my best friends was a white individual. We grew up from elementary, middle school, high school, some college, and that's a lot of my generation. I think that's why we see those individuals who are protesting this thing. You don't only see African Americans, you see almost every race who's coming up and standing against this. And because a lot of us, again, have known each other our whole life. We've never even thought about, we played football together, we played basketball together, sports, etc. Our football coaches and people who we spent the majority of our high school and middle school years with, taught camaraderie and brotherhood and standing elbow to elbow. So our thoughts, I think, is very different. But I think that's the reason why you're seeing a larger awareness of it, is because of the generation that we're in right now. Not negating the history that we have been through. Benny, you brought up a great point, and I think I'm coming up upon my 5 minutes, but you brought up a great point, though. Two things. Number one, we have to do it together. There's no way possible that this person feels like this person's, is not doing enough, or this person's not doing it right. We have to come to the table and have those conversations, whether we want to or not. I don't care what your stance is. Someone has to sit at the table to have that conversation in order to conquer this thing. Secondly, and which you brought up, Benny, that me being a believer of Jesus Christ, I don't have any other option if I believe in God but to love my brother. There's no other way, that if I'm saying that I'm a Christian believer, that I can sit here and say that I want anything other than peace. is there frustration within that? Is there a um, um, a yearning and a burning for change in our police system? Yes. However, I'm a man of God first. But before anything else, God makes my life possible. So I think that if on a spiritual point that we led with that, I think that we can definitely cross conversations to really make some effective change. But it's going to have to happen with older, younger generations. It's going to have to happen with our African American community within itself. It's going to have to happen with other rationalities within itself, coming to the table to hear stuff that you don't want to hear, possibly, or to hear something that you didn't want to hear.
Right.
Things like that.
Thank you, Brian. Pastor Joe.
Yes, sir. Well, first, let me just say thank you for the honor it is to participate in this. Fairly new in the community. I've been here 3 years. And so, but I'm a lifelong Texan and have lived in the state now for 60 years. And so I have some thoughts. I don't want to oversimplify the idea of how did we get here. But I guess I want to summarize what I would think through about how we are where we are as a community here in Temple in Central Texas with this idea, and that is we don't own the problem. We haven't taken ownership of the problem of racism. By we, I mean the collective whole of the community. We usually think of it as someone else's problem. It's a we versus they, or it's a y'all's problem. What I mean by that is we don't experience it as a white Southern 60-year-old male. I have never experienced racism. And for years, actually decades, have always felt comfortable saying, well, I'm not racist. But that's no longer enough. That's no longer a solution. It's similar to the COVID-19 situation right now. Until you get COVID-19 or it shuts your livelihood down, what's the big deal? It's no big deal. We're even in a community now that can't agree on whether or not something as simple as wearing masks ought to be required, when it's clear that that sort of thing would help mitigate the problem. And until you have that, or it shuts your business down, you really go on about your business and don't really care. It's someone else's problem. Personally, I'm a member of the vulnerable population because I have an underlying health condition. Not that old, but I do have an underlying health condition. And so I cannot afford to get COVID-19. I can't take that risk. So I'm very, very aware of that. And so I'm all about the masks, and I'm all about preaching the masks and telling people that all the time. But if I go back to think about racism, I would say that we as a community, especially the white community, has not begun to own the problem. It's someone else's issue. We, as a church, at First Baptist Church Temple, have to think about the fact that 10 years ago, when a fire happened downtown, the church had already bought property out west, and the church relocated. What we lost in that relocation, we gained much in moving out to West Temple. What we lost in that was proximity to the whole of our Temple community. We have become predominantly a West Temple, South Temple, North Belton church. But our vision has to be for the whole county and for the whole community. And we're going to have to become very intentional about being in and engaged with our whole community across racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, lines in demographics. We're going to have to be very, very intentional about that. We have to take ownership. And I think awareness is the first step of taking ownership. We become aware by listening to stories, giving voice to those who have stories to share. We learn everything we can individually and as a demographic of white people. Not that First Temple is exclusively white, but I would say 95% of the membership is, maybe more, higher than that. The attendance is becoming more diverse, but not anywhere near where we need for it to be. And we only last year, a year ago tomorrow, added our first non-Anglo minister to the staff ever since 1874 in our start as a church. So we have a long way to go. We've got to build relationships, but ultimately what we have to do is know that we have to take action. Giving verbiage to things, sitting at tables is a good start, but we have to take ownership and we have to act. We have to lead. Thanks for hearing my heart tonight.
Thank you, Pastor Joe. Pastor Robinson. You're still muted, Pastor. There you are. Yeah.
Okay. Probably being the oldest participant on this panel, when you raised the question to me, how did we get here? My mind automatically goes back as far as I can recall. And when I think about all of the situations that have taken place during my life, I'm 73, soon to be 74. It's amazing that we're here today. All of the acts of evil, all of the disasters and calamities that have taken place upon the face of the earth. There's only one answer that I can present as far as how do we get here. We have arrived to this particular place and point in time in history and in our lives by only one thing, by the grace of God. If it hadn't been for God sustaining us, keeping us, preserving us, protecting us, we wouldn't be here. And I was thinking about that early this morning, about 5:30. A song came to my mind, and the song is the song of the church, a song that I'm sure all of us are familiar with. And as God would have it, the song was composed, the words were written by an individual that used to be a captain of a slave ship. And the song is entitled Amazing Grace. How we got here through all of the wars that I've lived to not be a participant in primarily, but to be a consequence of. I'm a baby boomer, product of the end of World War II. That's when the first atomic bomb was dropped upon any nation. Then we went through the Cold War period when we were at odds with the United Soviet Socialist Republic, and we got all of that propaganda, even as an elementary school student. I can recall the first time I went to the Texas Theater, which was one of two theaters that was downtown Temple, and it's predominantly a white theater. I went there to see a film on communism, and the film exposed us to, I'm in elementary school, exposed us to all of the brainwashing and the propaganda that the Chinese children were being exposed to, and how they were even persuaded to betray their parents if they did anything that was contrary to the doctrine of the Communist Party. Went through all of that and lived through Plessy Ferguson versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court decision that separate but equal was not constitutional, and the Civil Rights Act, 1964, and many other things that have been legislated that come down through the political system, the political process. And my observation as far as those situations were concerned, and we just finished celebrating Juneteenth. We're 3.5 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. The news finally got to Texas, and I've been in Texas all my life, so all I know is Texas as a state. It's been a problem, not so much as legislation or the development or establishment of policy, but the problem has become the implementation of the policy. There's always been some delayed tactics that have been employed. Well, we're working on it. The timing is not right, and as we can see today, even though we have the laws on the books, and Judge Jezik and Cunningham can probably help us in those particular areas, there's been a whole lot of hesitancy, a whole lot of hindrances concerning the implementation of the law of the land that are already on the book. And when you think about even the preamble, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with unalienable rights, and among them are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. When have we really implemented that? That's the primary, the main injustice that exists in this nation. It's not that we don't know what to do, it's just we just have not chosen to do it as a people, as a whole, as a nation. Have not chosen to implement the laws of the land and make them applicable to every citizen of this nation, or to everyone who's even involved in this nation in any shape, form, or fashion. So I'm amazed that America still exists as a nation today, when we consider all of the dangers that we've been exposed to, all of the things that we've done unto ourselves, all the things that we've allowed to have done unto others. And the reality of it is, all of us have to bear some of the responsibility, because if it wasn't for the grace of God, we would all be wiped out. We're only here because God has allowed us to be here. And I'm fully convinced that we are not here just to be here. God has us here at this particular time in our lives for his purpose. And that is the problem. The problem is we've been too much involved with doing what we want to do, and a whole lot less involved in doing what God directs us, doing what we know God has told us to do. And that's a faith issue. That's a faith problem, because if you believe in God, then we'll do what God tells us to do. That's a struggle that we all are confronted with. I don't know how many times I've had to have a change of mind. And somebody said on the presentation a few weeks ago, in answer to the question, where do we go from here? One individual said there needs to be a repentance that takes place on the part of all of us. He didn't get very much support at all for that. And if I say it, there's a possibility that I won't get very much support for it either. But that is the reality. We need to have a change of mind that will change our way of viewing, change our way of feeling, and certainly change our way of thinking about each other and about the world at large. You know, a different worldview, a different view of ourselves, a different view of others, different view of the circumstances that exist that hinder the progress toward advancing, that every individual gets an opportunity. Every individual gets an opportunity to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. So when I think about that song, Amazing Grace, it just ministers to me. I think about the words, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I'm free. And when I think about the COVID thing, you know, that ought to shed enough light on our condition and our circumstances to cause us to understand that we need somebody that's far more equipped, far greater, far more in control than we are. We need some guidance that we don't have within ourselves. My time up?
Yes, sir. Judge.
Yeah.
And thanks to the NAACP for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. I'm honored to be here tonight. The first question was, how do we get here? And I wish I understood exactly how we got here. I think it's because we went about believing that things were better, hoping that things were better, believing that things were equal and that things were fair. And we chose not to see what was really going on. I think that changed a month ago when we sat in our homes in front of our TVs and watched a police officer kill George Floyd. I think that was the wake-up call. The next question is, where do we go from here? And I'm not sure that I know the answer to that one either, but I do know that we have to move forward and we have to fix this. The police violence, in my mind, is a symptom of the problem, that we never really have found equality and justice and fairness. We've passed a lot of laws trying to achieve that, and those certainly were necessary. But I think at this point, we need to quit trying to work from the top down and work from the bottom up. And I think that that means we need to listen to each other. We need to listen to Black voices in our community. We need to listen carefully, and we need to understand what's being said. I think if we truly sit down and listen, and then talk honestly with each other, I think we can find solutions. You know, the thing that disturbs me about COVID is, I mean, everybody's exposed, everybody's at risk. But when you hear about minority populations at greater risk, that's just a symptom of the problem that has never been resolved and that we've got to get resolved. My experience for the last 40 years has been in the legal field, and so that's what I want to talk about for just a minute. There is no doubt that the criminal justice system in our country is flawed, but I honestly believe that we can fix it. We have a tremendous number of mentally ill defendants in the criminal justice system, and the legislature a couple of years ago decided that we need to address their needs. Well, let me tell you, folks, attorneys and judges don't know how to address those needs. People that are mentally ill should not be locked up. They should be given and provided health services. I left the bench, I retired 60 days ago, and when I left, probably 40 to 60% of the inmates in Bell County Jail had mental health problems. And there's nothing peculiar about Bell County. That is nationwide. Harris County Jail in Houston holds more mentally ill folks than any healthcare facility in the state of Texas. We need to fix that. We need to get those people the help they need in the system they need. We all recognize that minorities are incarcerated and overrepresented in prisons and jails. And by that I mean that the incarceration rate for minorities is much higher than for white populations. I know how some people would explain that, and they would just say, well, that's who's committing crimes. I think that the answer is much deeper than that. And I think that because we don't have equal access to educational opportunities, because we don't have equal access to employment opportunities, that this system is not treating folks fairly. The young men that used to come into my courtroom would come in and they were very often defeated, alone, and angry. They didn't care what happened to them, and they certainly didn't care what happened to you. And folks, that's dangerous for them, and it's dangerous for our community. We've got to do something about that. We need to find out what it takes to get them prepared for a future with hope. This idea that I'm going to be dead or locked up by the time I'm 30, so what difference does it make? We've got to do away with that attitude, and we're not going to do away with that attitude unless we clear a path for education and job opportunities. We have to give these folks an education, we have to provide marketable skills, and we have to provide paths to employment so that they can support at a livable wage, so that they can support themselves and their dreams. But that's going to take sitting down and listening to those folks and finding out what happened and how we fix that. For many years, the idea in the criminal justice system is we're going to lock them up and throw away the key. Well, that doesn't work either. 97, 98% of them come back. And instead of locking them up and throwing away the key, why don't we start talking to them about what are they going to do when they're released, whether it's from the Bell County Jail or a prison system if that becomes necessary. But what are you going to do when you come back? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 5 years? What kind of job do you want to do? What kind of skills do you need to have that job? And how are we going to go about helping you get there? That serves this community much better than the idea of locking them up and throwing away the key. But in order to figure that out, we're going to have to sit down and we're going to have to listen. And then we're going to have to come up with solutions, and we're going to have to implement those solutions in our community. We're going to have to help families that are stressed, families that are struggling and are marginalized. It's not a big surprise to us that children growing up in chaos don't do well in school. And very often they drop out of school. You've probably heard the phrase social determinants of health. What that means is that the circumstance that a child is born into, the family that they're born into, the home that they're born into, the community that they're born into, has a significant impact on their health and well-being. Social determinants of health is sometimes called white privilege. Well, we need to do away with white privilege. Every child growing up in Temple ought to be privileged. They ought to have the privilege of a great education. They ought to have people that walk beside them and encourage them and support them. And we need to make sure that they have a future that fulfills their dreams and their hopes. Please understand that when I say we need to listen, I'm not suggesting that one side listens and then tells the other side how to fix their problems. That will not work. It never has, and it certainly is not going to work this time. We are in this together. There's no them and us or they and we. It is one community, and we're all living in it together. And we need to sit down as churches, as civic organizations, and we need to listen. We need to figure out what the solutions are, and we need to implement them. There are people in this community that have a passion for children. There are people in this community that have a passion for healthcare, for education, and we need to harness those passions and figure out the solutions, because we can't continue to do as we have done in the past. We have an obligation to work this out, to figure this out, and to make our community better for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Dr. G. Dr. Chinchik, you're muted. There you go.
Okay, here we go.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. It's really, really, really my honor to be here. I thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I'm fairly new to the Temple community as well, getting close to about 3 years now. Before then, I spent most of my young adult life in the Dallas area, Irving to be specific, if you're familiar with the DFW area. And, you know, I'm a psychiatrist, so I talk about emotions a lot. And when I heard about this, I really struggled with the question to trying to figure out exactly what the question is asking, because to me that's also important. And I think one of the things I noticed about it was the question is, how did we get here, and where do we go from here? And one of the things that came to mind was the question in itself kind of speaks to the discomfort of what's going on with us right now. In some ways, we're not even comfortable putting a name to what here is. And in some ways, that's a good thing, because I find that discomfort is usually what leads to change. So I think we're actually in a good place right now. And then some of their panelists have made some wonderful points that I'm not going to repeat so much, but I'll kind of point out some of the things that I was going to talk about as we mentioned before. So kind of going back to what is here. So there are two big issues that I'm assuming is referring to here, which is one, the COVID-19 pandemic that's basically been ravishing people, not just physically, economically, but mentally. I hear a lot about it at my work. I personally have not taken care of anyone that's had COVID, but I've seen first, I've seen close and personal how it has affected people psychologically in pretty profound ways. So in terms of the science of it, I won't really speak too much to that. But as to the other issue of racial relations, which like Dr. Jessic talked about, some of the specific incidences and things that's been brought up are more like symptoms of it, but it's something that's been an issue for centuries. This is not new. It's just that potentially we're in hopefully a turning point in history where we're trying to talk about it, and we're feeling the discomfort that comes with talking about it, and we're trying to figure out how to get out of that discomfort. But I would actually argue that we shouldn't be so quick to get out of that discomfort and use that discomfort to figure out what we can do to actually make a change. So along the lines of where do we go from here? I too don't know where we go from here, but here are a few things that I've personally thought about. One of the things that I've tried to learn, and I keep trying to learn, is listening to other people. There are probably few people like me in Temple. Most of my patients don't look like me, they don't sound like me. But I hope and I think I'm able to understand where they're coming from by just listening. And I think that's probably the most important thing. And when people are uncomfortable, clear discussions might not happen so much, because honest talks usually bring about discomfort. So I think definitely listening to each other, listening to the person next to you in your workplace, listening to what the other person is feeling, what they're thinking, where they're coming from, what motivates them to feel the way that they do. And this is not just the people of color talking, but also our, other races talking as well, because they also have their own motivators. And if we don't understand where they're coming from, we may not necessarily be able to implement changes that could be sustainable. I think some of the other things I had on here has really been talked about. So I think I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Dr. Gigi.
Thank you.
Right. Roy?
Yeah, hi, I'm Roy Rhodes, and I'm a pastor at Impact Temple Church, and I'm just really honored to be invited to this panel. I've only been here in Temple about 10 months, moved here from Houston, and so some of you folks say you were new here, and you've been here 3 years, so I'm very new. Like Dr. Aquara, I've a lot of the things that I think about when I think about how we've gotten here have been articulated better than I would have. I also struggled with that, with what we mean by when we're talking about here. Some will call all the things that we're going through right now crises. A crisis, the etymology of the word crisis comes from the Greek word meaning decision. And we do have decisions to make in this. We can continue to press forward in the discomfort, like Dr. Aquara was just talking about, and work toward change, or we can decide to not do that and to allow the status quo to prevail. And that has been a choice that we have been making for 450 years. The choice to, in some ways, maintain the status quo or to not push beyond our comfort levels. One of the things that I think COVID-19 and our protests and the killing of George Floyd, I think, have in common is that they're all apocalyptic. Apocalyptic as in they're revealing the things that are already present. George Floyd, when he was dying, he was pleading and saying that he can't breathe. He wasn't the first Black person killed by a cop in recent years who said that he can't breathe. And so a lot of what feels like, maybe from a white perspective, what feels like things that are new have been in place. They have been happening, and they have been felt, and they have been suffered by our brothers and sisters, and we haven't been aware, I think, as we may be more now. COVID-19 has revealed a lot about the fragility of some of our systems. We don't have clear communication from scientists about the efficacy of masks, and we have kind of a breakdown happening with regard to our ability to work together as a community, to agree on a solution and to move forward with it. Those conversations have not been clear, and they've not been bathed in a spirit of togetherness. And so I think COVID has revealed those fragmentations, but the fragmentations have been there, and the disparities in our healthcare system have been there. We've talked about how COVID-19 is disproportionately killing members of the Black community by population, but those disparities have already been there, and we've known that. In Texas, a Black mother is 3 times as likely as a white mother to die in childbirth. Those systems, have already been in place. And so nothing I think that we're seeing in terms of problems are new. And what we have instead is just this renewed urgency to pay attention, to acknowledge the pain that is there, and to address it. And so if I can preach for just a second, in thinking about where we go from here, one of the things that I find fascinating about God in the Bible is that his way of interacting with the world is by being present with his people. And so in the Old Testament in Israel, he was present. His presence was signified in the tabernacle and the temple. In the New Testament, John says that the Son of God, or the Word of God, became flesh and he dwelt among us, so that in the person of Jesus, God was with us in our humanity and with us in our suffering. Philippians describes Jesus as letting go of his comfort, letting go of his place of privilege in order to suffer with. And he suffered to the extent that he joined those who were dying by the instruments of oppression. That's what a Roman crucifixion is. It's an instrument of oppression. He chose that death in solidarity with our suffering. And then on the day of Pentecost, God's presence in the world was poured out on his people. And so the church is then called to be present to the world in its suffering. And I have not seen us being very present with each other, being physically just in each other's lives in a way that when there is a mother who watches a young man die on the news, and she sees her own son or her own husband in that, and the pain that she is feeling in that. These are our Christian brothers and sisters who these things are happening to. But the white church, and this, I'm speaking from that perspective, we've not been fully present to that and said, we're brothers and sisters, your pain, we're going to mourn with you, and we're going to be with you in this. These injustices in our school systems, in our justice systems, which Judge Jessic brought up, the injustices in our medical systems that COVID is revealing, these are all crises, and they've been happening for so long. We have to treat them as crises. And if we are followers of Jesus, then we do not shy away from living in solidarity with our brothers and sisters who are suffering, joining our voices with them and seeking solutions. I think that the white church, white Christians have been accused of being, in some cases, passive, and that's been, I think, generous. Martin Luther King called moderate Christians out pretty hard in his saying that, moderate white Christians were a bigger problem than the overt racists in the cause for racial justice. And so I believe that the way for moving forward is by being present with each other and by enjoying the hospitality, enjoying gracious hospitality. And real quick, I know my time is up, but here's what I mean by that. I have some friends who have been very hospitable to my family, and they have described openly and shared their suffering as a Black family here in Temple. Some of that suffering has been just what we see on the news, and a lot of it has been just the things that happen here in Temple, or the things that happen here in America when you're a Black family. They shared those experiences with us, trusting us not to be, fragile and defensive. And that kind of graciousness helped me understand their lives more, and helped me understand my lives more, as I see the way that my whiteness has shaped my own experiences. That's hospitality. That's extending trust to people, not knowing if we're fully safe. And I believe that in addition to policy conversations, prayer conversations, we have to be creating spaces in which we can safely listen to each other, share stories, and come away with a deeper understanding that these things are crises.
Thank you, sir. Danny? Benny Cunningham.
Okay. Hey, Benny.
Hey,
I'm outside, so it might be a little windy. I really want to thank everyone and just the words everybody's been saying. What else can you say? I usually introduce myself to strangers in this way. My name's Andy Cunningham. The most important thing you need to know about me is I'm a sinner saved by the grace of God through Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior. No one on this Zoom call or no one I know has outsinned me, so I can tell you the grace of God is more abundant than you can imagine. And that it's been my life hope that would inform me, that it would change me, that it would guide my thoughts, my hearts, my mind. And I believe that is the most important thing you can know about me. The second most important thing you can know about me is I'm married to Sandy Cunningham, who's the most beautiful girl in the world. And she was blind when I met her, so thank goodness she didn't see right then. But she stayed with me all these years and just has forgiven me and shown me Christ over and over in my life. I was not able to join the preparatory meeting, but I did meet with Benny ahead of time, and we kind of talked about what I might share. How did we get here? Where are we? I like all those mystical questions, as if we could really answer that. But I think what I would like to do is give it a shot. The Christ I follow was asked most of those questions when he was walking around, and he usually just answered with stories. And maybe we can just kind of tell a couple of stories and then cut it short so we can get to the questions. I think Benny said it from the first part of this conversation tonight. He said, what's going on? You know, what's going on? I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember when we heard that song sung by Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, and all the things that he was lamenting, this idea of lament. And what Pastor Robinson was talking about was confession and repentance, and lament is one of the traditions of the church, just to be in deep sorrow over the pain of the world, the world we live in, the community we live in, the folks that are around us, to know who they are and be able to lament that the world is not the way it's supposed to be. And this is what I was sharing with Benny, as we had the blessing of being able to go to many cultures through the world. It's been nothing special about me, but God's grace. I've been able to be over into Ukraine right after the Iron Curtain fell, and been there several times. And we've been partnered with folks in Central Africa, Rwanda, just after the genocide and the conflicts that came from there, and the tribalism, and just the awfulness of the things that happened in that culture, the things that happened in the culture of Ukraine after people like Lenin and Stalin literally just took them captive and displaced them. And so what I would like to say is how we got here is we have a great national calamity of our own, and slavery and all that it has meant and does, and everything that's happened because of slavery, from its inception, from its economic oppression, from its lack of dignity, from its just really assault on humanity that this country cannot even begin to imagine, that we should be even anywhere near beyond the pain from that sin in this country. And all along, you could find the people of God in the midst of it. If you read the history of folks that were experiencing the oppression in Ukraine, experiencing the oppression in Rwanda, and experiencing the oppression of slavery, you'll find stories of faithful people who knew Jesus Christ, and they maintained the ability to be the people of God in the middle of the most awful and horrific things. And it's just inspirational. And I think how we got here must acknowledge the fact that we're still in the midst of the pain of the greatest sin that you could have, which is putting the innocent to death. And that's the central story of our faith. And So maybe what's going on now. And so as I would say is I think we keep underestimating the effect of the fall, the effect of sin in the world, the effect of sin in our own hearts. And what's really going on is there's forces that are at work in our own hearts, in our community, in our context, in the world, in our political powers. There's forces that are just, their whole idea is to divide us, to rip us apart across any line it can imagine. The worst thing that could happen to anything that would be powerful is that if good people got together and became united. And so there's so many forces that tear us apart across cultural lines, socioeconomic lines, race lines, language lines, culture lines. And we just generally as people get settled into that, and we just make that normal. We normalize those kinds of differences. And I'll just confess that if there was something to do different and something we can do from 60, I'm 60 now, moving forward, what I want to do is just kind of move past the regrets that we have and find some way to intentionally be together, to know that there are great forces, rhetorics and institutions and sinful hearts that are at work trying to pull us apart. And when it's God's proposition that through the power of Jesus Christ, that we could be brought together in his name. So how do we go forward? I want to tell a couple of stories, and maybe this will be helpful, because I think the idea that Pastor Robinson and all the other folks have really talked about is we talk about our mental health, but this idea of reconciliation is a scriptural issue. It comes from the Bible. The world talks about what it means to be reconciled, but we're to be ambassadors of reconciliation, because we're now reconciled with Christ, with God through Christ. Now we can be agents of reconciliation. And Benny Walsh is a model to me for that. He intentionally walks around reconciling and trying to be an ambassador of reconciliation. I was walking through we were called one time in North India to go to where this church had been burned down by the Hindus. The Christian church had been burned down by Hindus. And as I was walking along, I was kind of young in my faith, and so I was pulling up all the Psalms in my head and just praying, all those imprecatory Psalms, God, pull the teeth out of the enemies and knock their tents over or whatever. And there was an older pastor from North India just walking around, and he was picking up the kind of chars of the burnt church and putting them in a bag. And I said, "What are you doing? Why are you picking that up?" And he said, I'm taking this so that when the person that started this fire comes to Christ, we can celebrate over this charred wood and be reconciled. And, those are just the kind of moments where you're just made to feel small, and then maybe your heart changes just a little bit. And our friend that got us started in Rwanda, he literally came out of the genocide. And he lost family in the genocide, and that was a tribalism that took place, and they were literally killing people over all kinds of propaganda, all kinds of power struggles. The punchline to that story is he later reconciled with the family that actually killed his family members, and the father or one of the sons of the fathers that committed that violence ended up agreeing to take care of his mother, Celestine's mother, for the rest of her life. So I have seen the power of reconciliation, and I would hope that the way forward is going to be that. I remember one of our heroes in the back. At some point, it's got to be about the hearts and minds. We can do many things, but at some point, it's just got to be about our hearts and minds. We've got to have them change. We got to look on each other differently. And the last thing is all the things that kind of enter our hearts. The greatest one that I see is fear. We walk around in fear of one another, and we just got to quit doing that. We've got to quit fearing each other based on what we see, what we assume, what we wonder about, or even our prior experiences. We got to quit doing that. We got to give every person we see the benefit of the doubt and know that they're loved by God and that they are precious to Him. And when I think about that, I think about COVID, and I'll stop here because let me tell you, it is pressing on everyone. We are in our church, we're navigating these waters, and you guys all know, y'all have done this, and we hear about how hard it is on families who can't go see loved ones in in the hospital, or someone has passed and they can't even have a funeral with folks that come by greater than 10 people, or just the many things that are pressing on it. So whatever the dynamics of COVID are for y'all, it is pressing on everyone. Moms having to take care and take over the education of their kids when they weren't necessarily prepared for it. Not that they're not able, just right in the middle of things, and people losing their jobs. So what everyone else thinks about COVID, one of the things that's happening is really, really pressing on our culture and pressing on our people. And we are hoping as a community that we're able to respond to those needs, not just the mental health, but the spiritual health and even the physical health help that's needed so people can get by. Thanks for letting me share.
Rodney?
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Rodney Duck, and I coined myself as a community facilitator. I've been in this area for approximately 2 decades, and I've had the blessing to be able to establish a nonprofit by the name of Impact Outreach, which stands for Intelligent Minds Proven and Applying Commitment. For the last decade and a half, we've been working in the juvenile justice systems around the state of Texas, as well as alternative schools, foster cares, and halfway houses and transitional homes, really trying to give the kid a hand out instead of a hand up type of thing, trying to teach them how to stand on their own and fight on their own. I've been blessed and fortunate to actually have a platform for these kids to speak through, which has been known as Ally Youth Chat, the chat that everybody needs to hear. It's an educational dialogue used to curtail the national epidemics of juvenile delinquency. It was a PBS show seen on local PBS for the last 5 years. A lot of the kids that you've seen in front of the camera and behind the scenes have been kids that were from those actual situations and conditions, that seeing that their voice does matter. And it's been a blessing to be led in that direction for that. I'd like to thank my good friend Benny for inviting me on. I'm very passionate. These topics are very near and dear to me. So I probably would step on a lot of feet as we go forward. It's no intention of mine to offend anybody, but I have to speak the truth as the truth comes through me. The question was, how did we get here? And that's the biggest question that we have to be concerned with today, because how do we get here is based off of social psychology. Social psychology is broken up into 3 pieces of framework. We deal with the disposition, the situation or the condition, and the system. We talked about the police killings, we talked about the riots, and we talked about the protests. Those are nothing more than mere conditions of the problem that we have that's placed on those that are dispositioned. But the true root of the cause is the actual system that we go against. It's the system that knows that those that are in disposition has to go through this barrier, this filter level, in order to get through the system. And that is those that we see with the police department, sometimes the local, county, and state. They create this condition in these environments within our local cities where it literally puts the actual boot or the knee on the throat of the people that live within the conditions of which they come from. Point in case, we're in Temple. Step across MLK, it's a different world. We know it's a different world. The city of Temple knows it's a different world. But year after year after year that I've been here for the last 20 years, there have always been a proverbial boot on the throat of the people on the east side of Temple to uplift that community, to give them the funds to rebuild, to regenerate, to make them a wholesome part of the community. But we know across the MLK, that iconic MLK, that Mecca at one time MLK, where it was nothing more but Black businesses that attract soldiers from Fort Hood in the clean area to come give them a foot to stand upon, has been a desolate island, with the exception of some frameworks and some Black churches that has pretty much stood up on that east side of town. Pastor Robertson being one of them, Roscoe Harrison having another one, A&Me is another church that's been on that side. That's the framework that's left, with the exception of Meredith Dunbar, which is the school that's there. There's nothing else that's there. You have economic disparity, you have educational disparity because there's no schools that's there, you have financial disparities because most people have transportation issues or educational issues where they cannot receive a job that's there. Now, what's the strategy to get past this? My dearest friend, and I say this, and I've had millions and millions of conversations with her. She has passed, Ms. Bennett Curtis, have always said, you cannot legislate what's in people's hearts. You cannot legislate what's in people's hearts. In the hearts of a lot of people across the nation, and I'm talking about nearly 70% of the European population here in the United States, have a different framework, have a different way of thinking. And because racism is not what we think racism is. Racism has nothing to do with not liking anybody. Racism has nothing to do with being showing discrimination. Racism has nothing to do with prejudice. I could be prejudiced because I like a different form of ice cream. I prefer chocolate over vanilla. That doesn't necessarily make me a racist. Racist has something to do with economic power. That's all racism is. And those that are in power, the same as monopoly, holds the money. And those who holds the money raise the rent. They raise the property taxes, and also they control education. Also they control the economics. Also they control everything that happens in the city. And those that are below that poverty line has to take pretty much the handouts that's left on the table of those that's there. So how do we get past racism? Well, we have to come together as a nation of people. And when I mean a nation of people is that I come from Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's one of the iconic areas where there was a massacre that was there. My family was part of a massacre, meaning that the United States government dropped bombs from the sky, pretty much desolating the whole city of people. That was the system that done that. The only way my people and some of the Black Indians were able to get past that is because they came together as a nation and they fought the United States government in order to get their settlements that's due. In order for Temple or anywhere across the nation to receive their just due, is we have to come together as a nation, hand in hand, nobody with any alternative motives, and we have to be able to pretty much take what is rightfully due to us. It's happened across this world, it's happened across this globe, but for whatever reason, we are always at the back of the line, the back of the bus, the back of the train, the back of the airplane, the back of the car. Now it's time for us to move ourselves to the front of the line. As a registered nurse, COVID, disparities, it's big, it's happening. It's been happening here for the last 90 days or more. But it's not really COVID, it's everything that deals with the disparity of health, as the doctor or the judge said earlier about the social determinants of health. It's pretty much white privilege. And we know that whites are always going to get the fair shake when it comes to health. I see it all the time in the healthcare industry. Sometimes you have to be silent to the fight and pick your battles, but it comes a time and a place where we should not have to be silent, and right should be right and wrong should be wrong. But the systems that prevail above us puts us in these conditions that we cannot work through. And when we cannot work through these conditions and we become a problem because we want to do what the good is for the community, we are relieved from our duties within the community. So it's a pleasure to be a part of this. I hope that I can add some positive input. And thank you very much again, Mr. Walsh, for inviting.
Thank you, panelists, everybody. Very good information from everybody. I'll save my comments to the end because we're already at 8:15. Zoe, would you like to ask the question?
Okay, the first question. Sorry. How can we move forward with fair business practices in Temple? So not just small businesses, but Black businesses, all businesses that are small.
I wouldn't mind starting off with that. I've been in this area for approximately 2 decades. As a young man, I've established businesses within this area. There's a lack of support, there's a lack of assistance from the actual city itself. One thing that I do know, that I've been in this area, and people can probably contest that has been in this area, is we see a lot of Indian and Pakistani pretty much convenience stores that pop up. A lot of those stores pop up due to generational wealth, meaning that someone came sacrificed, received a grant, a city grant or a county grant or a federal grant to actually establish this. They've received some form of tax breaks throughout the year. And what they've done is they pretty much have transitioned and moved their family into these convenience stores, which has created this generational wealth that's there. If you look throughout East Temple, how many Black businesses do you know of? There's no Black businesses in East Temple. Matter of fact, there's very few businesses of color throughout Temple itself. So again, if we know that there's a problem and we know we want economic prosperity, not just for Black people, but for the city of Norman, because we know how much money small businesses can bring in. We know how much money a Black grocery store could bring in, because we see that with the Hispanic grocery store constantly turning over customer after customer, meeting their needs. We have to start looking at that from an economical standpoint and build an economical task force to actually bring those things to light for the east side of Temple. It's not just for here and now, it's for the next generations to come. I grew up in Black Wall Street. I never really shopped at a white store until I was in high school. And the only reason why I shopped at a white store when I was in high school is because I had a car and I was able to drive out of the Black community. 90% of what I grew up with in my Black community at Black Wall Street were all Black-owned businesses, which sparked a very powerful trait within me to want to be able to own my businesses. By owning your businesses, you can give back to your community, you can establish jobs, and you can also ignite a fire in young people that want to grow up to be just like that business owner, Mr. Gibbs on the corner, taking care of kids.
Anyone else? I totally agree with what Rodney had just said. I think we as a Black community need to support Black businesses. Until we start supporting Black businesses, they're not going to be able to survive. And so when we see a Black business out there, we must support it. Corporate America is supporting corporate America. It's just that simple. So we have to figure out a way to support one another to make our Black businesses grow. We need to, of course, take this to our ideas and thoughts to, the city itself, and tell the city that we need them to help support us to get these Black businesses on the right track. Because, we can't make it on our own. Like when Rodney said, I was raised in Kansas City, in the area where I was raised, y'all done heard about the 12th and Vine. Every business down there was an African-American business. And that's how we survived, and we supported each other. Right now, we have a problem with supporting each other. Until we get that thought out of our mind, we're going to stay in the same situation as until Jesus comes. So,
before she goes to the next question, are there any legal issues concerning this particular question about fair business practices? I'm just kind of concerned from our legal consultants here with us tonight.
Annie?
Well, I always defer to judges, because judges know more than lawyers do.
Judge Jessica?
Well, I have absolutely no experience in this area, except that I can tell you, my thought is that, there's no legal impediments to it, and I would think that in some cases there would be some assistance for minority-owned business or women-owned businesses, things like that. I mean, it's pretty shocking when you think that there's no grocery store in East Temple.
Yeah.
So I guess what Judge Jessica is mentioning is this goes back to the idea of, laws and then hearts and minds. The idea that there are laws and things in place. The thing is you put these things in place and then they're still going to get executed by people, and people need to figure out our community needs to take a hold of those kinds of benefits that are there and figure out a way to administer them in a way that makes sense for the community. To the extent that that's possible, we all need to really work hard at it. The laws are in place that really are, you know, many people died for the laws to be in place, the non-discrimination laws, the fair lending practices law. There are layers and layers of laws, but then you still, as Rodney says, you still walk down, you go, what's left? What happened with all the laws, with all the money, with everything? What happened? And so the complex situation is maybe we got to think about how to do this differently than what kind of has, what maybe even one time we had many Black-owned businesses, but now we don't. And one of the things I would want to consider, and this is kind of a legal deal, is you set up some type of cooperation or partnerships where you kind of get beyond it's Black-owned or white-owned, but it's community-owned. But we serve the areas that are in need, so that we're working together in all of the areas that are in need. And yes, needs to have minority ownership, and yes, should have minority governance in the areas where those businesses are opened. But as it stands, what happens is, even there are statistics on that, Black-owned businesses generally move out of areas of minority or lower economic communities. And we've just got to find some way just to say, no, we're not doing that as a community. We're going to have good businesses in our communities of need.
Thank you.
So,
Next question. Love never fails, and darkness will not overcome the light. And moving forward as one, what strategic actions will be taken to build upon the solid foundation for our community?
well, I guess I can kind of answer that just by what we're doing now. I can remember just recently when we were dealing with the Michael Dean case, we met at the Unincluded Club weekly to figure out strategic plans to make things happen. That's what we have to continue to do. I believe one of the other reasons why we're in this situation where we are today, we got comfortable at living what we thought are called the best life. When we got 2 or 3 cars and a house, we forget that we're not in the best life. And we have to continue to have meetings like this, continue to come together and make things happen. That's how change happens. We have to come together as a community to make change happen. There are laws probably on the book right now that we need to get off the books and change some policy, make things happen for our community.
I'd like to address that if I could.
Yes, sir.
That is a spiritual issue. Love never fails, and darkness will not overcome the light. And along that line, I've been encouraged by some of the comments from my fellow pastors tonight, acknowledging that there is an issue that concerns all of us as the body of Christ. And one of the things that used to exist in the temple was a temple ministers alliance, and it was pretty well supported at one time. Some things happened that caused it to not continue to exist. And one of the things that I want to do in that regard is to initiate, starting tonight, an effort to reorganize a ministers alliance. So at least the pastors, according to what Roy Rhodes was just saying, and thank you so much for that, give us an opportunity to be vulnerable, to even acknowledge the fact that all of us, even as leaders of the people of God, have repentance issues that we need to deal with ourselves. And so that's one of the things that I want to do, because I know for sure, and thank you, Brother Rodney, for quoting my dear friend, Ms. Bennett Curtis. She's absolutely right. There can be no change that takes place in this world that's going to be of a positive impact, except there be a change of our hearts. And that's where we come into this situation, because that's all we're talking about. That's the most radical thing that has ever been done upon the face of this earth. Jesus comes and gives us new hearts, causes us to come out of ourselves and to become one in him. So that's one of the things I want to do. And that might even address the next question about prayer events and things like that. The church can be actively involved in bringing the leadership of the churches together, not just pastors, but also our officers, our deacons, and those who are serving in those capacities of leadership in the body of Christ. Some way to get us all together so that we can at least be on the same page. Because if the church is not at the forefront of this thing, it's just going to be business as usual. I said earlier, the policies are in place, but it takes us forever to implement them. Then when they implement it, we still haven't got the 40 acres and a mule. How long has slavery been outlawed? 1865. So, and that's just one crude example of how implementation is delayed. So that's one way I see that we don't let the light go out and the love continue to be flowing from heart to heart and from breast to breast.
So he was referring to the next question was, besides public prayer events, what is the church doing to address the racial injustices in Temple, Texas? So thank you for answering that.
We're at 8:30. Would you ask question number 9? And everybody, it should be, I'd like a response from everyone on this one.
What coordinated effort will be taken to ensure that we have accountability and transparency from all government bodies in the Temple area?
Did I get a response from everybody on that? Judge Jessica? You're muted, Judge. Okay.
You know, to me, the key here is coordinated effort. We can't all run off in different directions. We've got to stay organized. We've got to have a plan. And I think if we listen, if we come up with a plan and we have solutions that members of the community think will work, and you know, if it's a discussion about healthcare, it's got to include healthcare providers.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a discussion about businesses, it's got to include business owners and probably corporations. If it's a discussion about the criminal justice system, it's got to include the police. It's got to include prosecutors in the city of Temple. And we've got to go to those areas with plans that have support and that the community is behind. And we've got to stay in front of those agencies and show them that support until there's a change. And that's it. To me, that's where the real hard work is going to come. It's going to take a lot of perseverance and a lot of coordination. I think it can be done. I think it has to be done. But that's the only way, is to keep the voices in front of those agencies and make sure that the changes are implemented.
So Robinson?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
My suggestion would be that we commit ourselves, this particular group here tonight, make that commitment to maintaining this relationship and serve as a core group for this coordination effort. And you're absolutely right. All the parties need to be at the table, and including parties that are the victims or the recipients of this unjust system that we're having to live up with, within. Because, you know, contrary to what public opinion might be, everybody has something to bring to the table. And whatever we bring to the table is useful at the table. So we can't just listen to the voices of those who are in those positions of authority, but also those who will be benefiting from those positions of authority. You said something earlier, somebody did, I don't recall, about the people that are directly involved in these particular issues. They need to have a voice because their voices are powerful. Their voices are the real voices that need to be heard. It has to be a joint effort from all of us, and it can start with us. That's my suggestion tonight.
Roy? You're muted, Roy.
Sorry, I didn't hear you call my name. I didn't know it was my turn. So one of the things about the word coordinated, one thing that's come out of the protest in Temple has been some younger leaders here in Temple, and some of those leaders have already started pulling in different initiatives, Black-led initiatives, and so Wake Up Temple is the name of the kind of coordinating effort of those initiatives. Dory Collins with the Unincluded Club has been a part of that, and they're also partnering with the Unincluded Club. And they're using some space here at Impact as a co-working space. So one of the things that coordinating is going to require for us is for our different generations of leadership to get together and join with what they're doing, or bring them into conversations about some of the other efforts that we're going to be a part of.
Pastor Joe.
I'm notorious for coming full circle on thoughts. I think it's the preacher in me. I kind of want to circle back to what I may have said at the beginning. I think for it to be a coordinated effort, it has to be representation from the entire community saying enough is enough. Those of us who represent, by and large, the key holders have to make sure we are participating actively, financially, vocally in the effort to bring this about. We have to own this as a community, and we have to work hard to make sure that we are not saying us versus them, but all collectively together in every way that we could be divided. We have to focus on what we have in common and own this problem together. I think especially those of us who are and have been for a long time in the demographic that has held the power and held the keys, we have to be willing to say enough is enough. And we are going to work together to share keys, to pass keys, to allow, that's been the biggest thing. I grew up in a community that was 65% Hispanic, but all the stakeholders were Anglo. And I did not realize until I was an adult that I never had to think about or approach life from the perspective of anything other than my white minority. When that community shifted to where those who were in the majority, it's now 75% Hispanic community, when they began to have the keys and take over, all of a sudden Anglo minority revolted, sued, protested. It was embarrassing and very divisive and destructive in the community. Very shameful actions took place. Amazing stuff. We have to not look at ourselves as all these different demographics, but see ourselves as fellow human beings who are in this together, And there's going to be some really shifts in power, and it's going to be it's going to be difficult, but we have to be committed to it.
Danny?
Well, I wonder if you could repeat the question, because I want to make sure I'm answering the question. I always hate if I go too far off track.
What coordinated effort will be taken to ensure that we have accountability and transparency from all government bodies and people?
Well, okay, I want to, so I've never lived in a culture where people in power had a yearn to be transparent.
No.
And I've never really seen a culture, no matter what the context or what the makeup of the culture is, where the people in power had a yearn to be transparent. And I think in our culture, when we ask about our government or anyone in power, whether there's a medical care provider or a medical system, county government, city government, they become where they are in most cases by votes. And so the coordinated efforts for me start with prayer. I've heard recently that prayer is, we got to quit praying. And I just, I got to tell you in my heart, I've seen prayer work and create transparency in places where without prayer it would never have happened. So I think coordinated prayer, when you ask the God in heaven to expose light into the darkness, and we just beg him to answer that we can do that. In our context, in our culture, when you want transparency, there's usually a collision. I always want information about something that involves someone else, and then they have individual rights, they have individual concerns. And we saw this with Michael Dean, with the handling, and when is our police department, when is our mayor going to give us information? And Benny and I had several conversations how frustrating it was. So I think when we ask questions of transparency, especially in our context, that comes to mind right now. Why can't we know? Why in one circumstances do you find out very quickly what happened, in this circumstance we don't? And there is a lot of good questions that have been pressed and need to be pressed and say, well, it needs to be the same for everybody. The transparency needs to be clear for everyone, and it needs to be consistent for everyone, no matter what happens. So coordinated efforts include us agreeing that needs to be the case, and then us bringing to bear that request to those who are literally in authority over us, and saying, this isn't acceptable to us. We need this to be better. And then we got to listen, because being in those positions isn't easy, and say, well, please tell us why you didn't. Help us understand why you couldn't communicate right now. And in this circumstance, we've heard apologies, which I think are good and necessary, but in the future, how do we know that things are going to be done better? I hope we don't have another incident where we got to find out if it's done better. I hope we have situations where we can come to trust one another. But make no mistake, in our culture, whenever we need transparency, we have this collision of rights. And this is, Judge Jessic did criminal, but someone's going to say, I'm going to sue you if you release that information. Or there's a legal ramification. There's some law that's being broken if we do one thing in this way or one thing this way. There's so many things that happen that we shut down transparency when real help can be had. And we just got to figure out what the right way to communicate about these things, especially with the families involved. So coordinated, we got to talk about it in these forums. We got to come to agreement and say, yes, that makes sense to us. We call the folks that are in authority over us. We've had this discussion. Can you please explain to us why this couldn't be done differently and what's going to be done differently next time? And if they don't do it, we vote them out.
Chichi?
So, not to repeat so much of what has been said already, but I'm somewhat embarrassed myself because I think part of what part of the things I was trying to say is just kind of be more aware of what your biases are, and I'm embarrassed myself to say that this is a topic that that I recognize makes me uncomfortable. So I think kind of piggybacking off of what Pastor Robinson said earlier was making an individual commitment to take this step that we've taken here today and running with it and not trying to make the discomfort go away. So I think I'm not sure what the coordinated effort is, but just thinking about human relations in general, to coordinate anything, you have to know what you're coordinating for. So from my standpoint, I'm assuming that most people that have taken their time today to be here, you care. And we're all learning something. We're all listening to each other and trying to get ideas. Is the people that are not here for whatever reasons that you may know, that I personally will try to be more vocal about what's going on and sort of spread that discomfort, because I think that discomfort will help spread more awareness into people's consciousness. And maybe we can start talking about, okay, what is the coordinated effort to move forward? So specifically what the effort is, I don't know. But personally, I think one of the things that I've personally committed even before this is to be more vocal to anyone that will listen, not just within my family or within my friends, because it will be like preaching to the choir. But I probably won't be afraid to say something even in the workplace, which is a pretty dangerous thing to do, because growing up, I think one of the ways that you cope with trying not to stir up anything is just to lay low and go with the flow. But I think if there's anything that can come out of this along the lines of moving forward is, you don't want to create trouble, but at the same time, you don't want to, once again, go with the status quo. And for me, I think is talking about what makes us uncomfortable and what's going on. So that would be my personal commitment, and then maybe we'll figure out the effort later.
Thank you, Doctor. Rodney?
Once again, Benny, thank you for inviting me out. This is a very, again, sensitive topic because it impacts me very directly. Every 5 years, I go to a place in Ethiopia called Lalibela. I have a spiritual guide there. He's a monk. He lives in a parish up on the mountain. Every time he sees me, and I've seen him for 3 times over the course of the last 20 years that I've been, I'm actually due to see him again. He always smiles at me, and he always says, you know why God has not given up on us, our humanity? Because a child was born. I take with that and say that the Bible is all about inheritance and legacy. You cannot ask people to be transparent because there's devious hearts among us. But us as a unit have the ability to have people be accountable for their actions, accountable for their decisions, accountable for being non-transparent. What we do today is not for us. It is for our children. They should reap the inheritance that we leave behind, because we should be able to ignite inside of them the next leaders for the community. Moving forward, there has to be pretty much a disembowelment of those that sit on the city council, these elected officials that are not open to the opportunities to grow a solid, unified community. And until we begin to prepare leadership maybe like a Dory Collins or any other young leader like a Brian Ward, to equip them to sit on these seats, to use the whole city of Temple to help build a section of Temple up so we can be a unified Temple, not a East Temple, not a West Temple, not a North Temple, not a South Temple. But when we talk about Temple, we just talk about Temple as one unified voice. Until that happens, we're going to always have the madness that happens at City Council. And I've been here for 2 decades, and it's been madness. So I asked of you guys to continue on with your accountability. If there's anything that I can do, I love to do it. Even if I have to sit behind the scenes and advise, I love to do it. There's a lot of kids that are interested in learning from you guys, because once you guys go, I don't know who's going to replace you to teach them. So we have to take this opportunity to always be in a teaching mode, because we are preparing the next form of leaders to run this city at our ripe old age. Once again, thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Brian, are you gone or are you still there? Okay. I think he said he had Bible study, so he's probably gone.
Hey, Benny, I wanted to add one more thing about coordinate. So we're at a town hall, we might as well make it interesting. But Roy, you mentioned something about other organizations, and I think coordinated is really important. And I really appreciate Rodney, because this idea of what can we do now? Some of us are older, and there's a proverb that a wise man plants a tree in his old age, because even though he won't sit under the shade, that maybe somebody else will when they come along after them. And this idea of who's next and who's training and how do we get together, coordinated in my mind has always been the best examples I've seen is when you have across the board folks working together, young and old together. I've heard the rhetoric that's being said about friends of mine that are on this panel, especially pastors in this area, being either puppets or in the pocket or so forth. I've heard that language used by other people who are having coordinated efforts. And I've heard calls for resignation and things like that. What I would ask for is if we're going to coordinate, I really want to coordinate. I'll buy anyone who wants me to step aside a cup of coffee and they can tell me why, or some of my friends that are doing this. But I really think that moving forward, one of the things we can do together is maybe ease back on the rhetoric and find a way to remember that some of these things were built on the backs of others, and that I don't know a man that has lived very long that's followed Christ that doesn't have some kind of regret that we couldn't have done more, and that we all have failed, and we all understand that, but we don't want to leave the cupboard bare. We want to keep part of the help if we can be that. So what I wanted to mention to you, Roy, is some of the folks that you're working with, they're specifically calling for not coordinated, and I really want to see if we can't work out something coordinated.
I think that, I mean, I'm pretty sure I know your references, but I would just say that, yeah, let's get together,
Good.
Thank you. We are really way over our time. Now, if y'all want to stay around a little longer, that's fine, but we are over our time. And I said an hour and a half, and we're about 55 minutes over that. I think this was a good conversation that we need to continue to have. Hopefully, one day soon, we can sit down in person and have this discussion, a peaceful discussion, where we can start healing wounds and get to another level in our lives. Everyone said something great. Everyone said something great that we need to work on and to heal. So thank you. Thank everybody for attending. Sorry we didn't get to your question, but this will continue. This will continue. This is only the beginning. And we will make life better for everyone here to be a part of the growing of this community. All right. Thank y'all for attending. We appreciate you. Bye.
Thank you.
Danny, would you mind hanging on for just a second? And Dory?
Sure, I'm here.
So I